Welcome to another episode of the Mighty Oak Show. Again, so glad to have you with us today. Looking forward to a wonderful conversation. But before we jump into that, I want to remind you, if you have not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do that. Subscribe. And then after you subscribe, go on over to that link that allows you to know when our content comes online. We have had a busy season of recording content, and it's all been great, and it's all for you. It's not for us, it's for you. We produce content that we believe will be a help and a blessing to you and to those that you know that may be in need of this. It's interesting, I've had this conversation actually several times over the last couple of weeks about our content and how so much of our content, although we produce it really from the context of the military life or the veteran, those who are dealing with a particular type of trauma in their lives, the conversations that we have really apply to everyone. We know this. We know that trauma is not reserved for veterans. Trauma is something that every human being who's ever been alive can relate to. Big trauma, little trauma, it's all trauma. And so much of what we talk about is how to move forward in the face of that. So go ahead and subscribe if you have not. Make sure you've hit the notification link and share this out to those that you know who might need this. And that'll be a help to you. If you're listening via podcast or over at Mojo 50, thank you for listening, but take some time later on to go to YouTube, and that would be awesome. Our guest today is someone that I've known for the last several years, 4 or 5 years, I would imagine. But we haven't had the opportunity to do the show today. Dr. Damon Friedman is our guest. He is the founder of SOF Mission, and he just recently released a book, Igniting Movements. We'll talk about that as well. But so much of what he does is right in line with what we as Mighty Oaks do. In fact, we have a handful of partners, and partner is defined very loosely in our world. But there are also those that we link arms with and move forward together with, and Damon and SOF Mission and their work is definitely that to us. So Damon, thank you for taking the time to be on with us. It's great to have you here. It's taken us a while to kind of work out the timing, but here we are. So thanks for doing it.
Yeah, well, Jeremy, super honored to be here. Love what you and Mighty Oaks are doing. We've been partnering for quite a while now, helping our warriors get back on their feet. What you guys are doing is extraordinary, and just really happy to be here with you. You're a phenomenal leader. You're doing some great work out there, and praying for you and the team all the time, especially during this crazy pandemic craze happening, and so our warriors are more isolated than ever. So your work and us working together as a collective it's critical now more than ever. So thanks a lot, Jeremy, for having me on and being able to be a resource for those out there that are part of the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. What a time to do the work that we do. It's crazy that you and I, our organizations would probably say something very similar. The worst thing you can do as a veteran or someone struggling with trauma is isolate yourself. And here we are in a government-imposed isolation. And so all of us are trying to deal with this. I know you guys have taken a unique approach to that, and we have as well. We'll get into your story, but talk about that for a second. What are some of the ways you've dealt with this period of time as you've continued to serve veterans?
Yeah, so what we did was, in order to pivot to what we call the COVID craze, is we went old school humanitarian mission style. What we did was we partnered with a lot of with the American Legion and Papa John's.
Wow.
And throughout the whole state of Florida. And what we did was we made COVID care kits, and in those COVID care kits we put masks and gloves and hand sanitizers and wipes and things like that. And in it we also put Papa John's pizza. I mean, all the owners, all the way from the Panhandle down to Miami, really partnered with us, and we put in one free pizza in it. And then depending on the audience, we would put some popcorn, maybe some chocolate goodies. If it was a retirement home, we would put in some socks. And we focused it at-risk veterans. And so we gathered together with a bunch of leaders throughout the state of Florida, and we packaged over 1,000 COVID care kits, and we had those delivered. That was pretty awesome because we got reconnected to a lot of the veterans that are out there. And sometimes you just have to really be flexible, think outside the box, and some goodness that happened from it is the emerging of a Veterans Coalition of Florida. And really, it's just an informal group of nonprofits coming together. And so now every month we're doing a Zoom promoting the resources that are available to Florida veterans. So it's really cool. We just had our first one just this last month, and it was booming. It was on live on Facebook. So really, sometimes you just have to be creative, and it's been such goodness. So God really blessed us on that. So that's how we.
Yeah, it's awesome. You think about the things you just mentioned in that box, and as happy as probably anyone would be to get all of those things, it's really not about those things, particularly when you're dealing with at-risk veterans, right? It's really about making a connection and communicating. In spite of everything else going on in the world, there are people who care about you right now, and I think that's why it's important to do. And I say this all the time: do what you can, whether you're an organization that can box 1,000 of these, or you're an individual who can walk across the street and say to someone who is at risk, I care about you, I'm here for you, what do you need? It's really that connection that's the important part in all that.
One of the cool things, though, Jeremy, with that is that for every COVID care kit, we actually put the message of hope in it. So it wasn't just giving them some goodies, and letting them know what resources are available, but we put in our film, Surrender Only to One, which won 6 national awards, and in it, plus an electronic discussion guide for it. And I'll tell you what, in that message, it's the stories of 6 operators or 6, military members signing on the bottom line, taking the oath, going to war, and then coming back, dealing with the implications of combat. But then how ultimately in the darkest of times, the commander of the universe, King, Jesus shows up and extracts him out of that kill zone. So it's a really powerful message. And so we were able to distribute thousands of those. So we were really excited about it. So these COVID care kits were multidimensional because we want to make sure people know out there that there is hope, and that hope is in.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's jump into your story. So start, wherever you'd like to, but I just finished reading your book, and you started kind of growing up in Los Angeles, going into the Marine Corps, making the worst decision of your life to transition to the Air Force, out of the Marine Corps. Why anyone would do that, I have no idea. But you did that, served for 20 years in special operations, and in that process started SOF Mission, and now doing many of the things you're doing now. Tell us that story, and I'd love to hear the faith aspect of that as you kind of unpack that for us.
Yeah, so every one of our warriors' story is unique, but those that find hope, it always ends the same. And for me, being raised and born in downtown Los Angeles, I had an extraordinary mother, single mother. My biological father was very, very abusive, psychologically, physically, spiritually. I mean, he is, probably, the worst father I could possibly imagine, and for most as well. We moved 14 different times in the first 12 years of our lives because we were running away from him. And so in Los Angeles, we lived in low-income housing. We even at one point lived in the projects, and my mom worked around the clock to put rice and beans down on the table. And so that's what we ate. And it was really hard kind of growing up. Lived in the melting pot, lived with African Americans, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, Armenians, Koreans, Vietnamese. And so I really lived in a very diversified area, and loved that piece to learn more about other cultures and appreciating them for who they are. And when I was about 12 years old, we moved to Florida. My mom, it was a desperate attempt to finally just start a new life. My brother and I were running with the wrong crowd. We ended up breaking the law, breaking and entering, stealing, burglarizing, all that other trash. And we ended up in juvie. And it was there that we had to make. My mom made a radical decision to move to Florida. And even though my juvie stint was actually in Florida, I carried my bad behaviors to Florida. But it was there in that cell that I heard a voice for the first time in my life. My biological father was always telling me that I would never amount to anything without him. And all of a sudden, for the first time, I'm in this cell and I'm thinking, there's got to be something more to life than all of this. There's got to be, there's got to be something more than all of this. And it was there in that cell where I felt, where I heard a voice. And that voice said, I have plans for you, plans for goodness and not for evil, plans to be victorious. It was there that I turned a whole new leaf, and I felt like it was the first time that at that time, didn't know that it was God. And he spoke to me, he spoke truth in my life. And it was the first time that I thought to myself, there's more to this. What kind of gifts do I have? And I realized that, as an adolescent, whenever the cops were chasing me, they never caught me. So I found the gift of running. My brother and I, we made a commitment to something, and we struggled with our academics. We failed a grade, kicked out of 3 different schools in 3rd grade. I mean, the story goes on, but it was in running that we found, this sense of purpose, right, and this freedom. And so Raymond and I, we started running 100 miles a week. And then we ended up one day, top runners in the state of Florida, became junior Olympians, garnered a scholarship. And then after the years of scholarships, running, I was the first one, my brother and I, first ones, that earned a degree. And when I was done, I thought to myself, whenever my family was struggling and we needed a place to stay, our country provided. Whenever we were hungry, our country provided. Whenever I needed an education, our country provided. And so it was there that I ended up making a commitment to go to the United States Marine Corps. So I'm sure I could get an oorah from you, Jeremy, on that one.
Well, you transitioned out, so I'm having a hard time with these bad decisions that continue to follow you through your life. But hoorah for the decision to go in. I'm not sure about the decision to go out, but we'll talk about it later.
Yeah. But no, so I joined the Marine Corps, and, like everybody else, back in 2000, we didn't know what was about to happen.
Sure.
And of course, 2001, 9/11 occurred, and everybody who was around can remember where they were on 9/11. Just out of curiosity, where were you? Do you remember where you were at?
Yeah, I was on the rifle range at Camp Pendleton. I was on Edson Range. Yeah. So we were qualing, and got the message that the Twin Towers had been hit and all that was accompanying that. I always tell the story. One of my Marines came up to me and said, "Hey, sir, what does this mean for us?" And I said, "Absolutely nothing. This is just, it's a thing. It's a blip on the screen. It won't mean anything to us." Like a year later, when we were standing in Kuwait getting ready to push into Iraq, that same Marine walked up to me and said, "So what does it mean now?" I'm like, yeah, well, whatever.
No, that's funny. I was in Camp Lejeune, and we were playing war games, right?
Yeah.
Big toys for big boys. And and when that second plane hit the towers, we knew it was on. And like you, deployed to Kuwait, I was actually in Camp Fox and Task Force Tarawa, breached through Safwan, and then of course raked all the way through the north. And I was a part of that team. And it was the first time that, obviously, we never knew we were really going to go to war, right? I mean, we'd hoped to, like they're training us to.
Right.
But then the only thing I ever shot at was a little green,
Right.
plastic, target or whatnot.
Right.
And it was there in 2003 that was the first time I ever saw experienced death.
Yeah. And
people would ask me how that invasion was. And it was like the power of military might. And literally at 2:30, the night was lit as if it was day, and we just decimated everything.
Right.
And when I came back from that deployment, I was completely different, changed. I remember I could sleep like 12 hours a night, and then I came back and I was having the first time struggle with sleeping, and my wife Dana was like, something's wrong. And of course, after 2003, I wanted to, like Jeremy, like Chad, he was a recon Marine. I wanted to be a recon Marine, and I got recruited. They opened it up to all MOSs, and I got recruited and selected to become a 2nd Force Recon Marine.
Yeah.
In 2005, I was in that unit for a small time. And I wanted to stay in Force Recon. I was a Pathfinder team leader there. And for whatever reason, struggled with my monitor and wanted to bring me back to conventional forces. And I really was wanting to be part of the special operations community. And at that time, MARSOC did not exist.
Right.
And, so I looked around and I thought to myself, maybe there's other opportunities. And of course, the great sin, as you mentioned, Jeremy. And I don't question, I understand why you would question me. But then I looked over and looked at the different branches, and I really love blowing things up. I think that's what you and I would agree on. and looked over, I looked at the SEAL programs, I looked at the SF programs, I looked at, Ranger programs, and I learned about combat control, and I said, this is for me. And so I crossed over into special tactics, and that was the beginning of a 15-year career of some hard work, capture kill missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, and really getting super close to the fight. And so that's where it all started.
Yeah, that's one of the smallest units in the special operations community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is, and it's an incredible job. We're all Halo, military free fall, combat dive, FAA air traffic controllers. We are also demolition qualified and also qualified in every weapon known to man and vehicle known, because we get attached to all different special operators. So we go overseas and we're in charge of the air to ground interface. So if an aircraft is flying over and they get in our area of operation, we help get them kinetic and we control their all the munitions and really bring some mass chaos against the extreme terrorist networks. And that's what we did. So from there, super excited about it, doing the nation's bidding and taking down some of the most dangerous high value targets out there in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I started struggling. The more missions, the more capture kills, the more targets, I started really experiencing these post-traumatic stress issues. And coming back, my wife started recognizing that I had insomnia. I started feeling anxiety. I started feeling, the inability to kind of cope with everyday stresses, and feeling levels of anxiety around a lot of people, and also one of the interesting pieces, which is a new signature injury of the war that's just surfacing, is mild traumatic brain injury, which is synonymous with concussions.
Right.
And I just, at that time, throughout my whole 20-year career, I have 5 registered concussions, and I've spent probably approximately a year on, in the hospital and on medical leave, recovering from my injuries. And so a lot of blurred vision, sensitive to light, feeling dizzy, all sorts of those things I started experiencing. And a lot of our physicians in the Air Force didn't understand that. So I started dealing with the implications of combat. And so in 2010, I was in my darkest time. Very similar like Chad, I found myself at the end of a rope. I was in a lot of pain. I didn't know what to do. And I got to the point where I questioned whether I should live or not. And I contemplated taking my own life.
What was your faith walk like at that time? You talk about being a young person and having an encounter with God. So from that point through your military career and to the point you just described, did you have a relationship with God? Was it an on again, off again type of relationship? Where were you standing at that moment?
That's a really good question, Jeremy. Back in college, I found Jesus, or Jesus found me, right?
Sure.
And I made a commitment to be a follower of Christ at the time. But you know what? I made the biggest mistake, like the majority of Christians. They don't really find a place of worship. They don't really fellowship. They don't get connected. They don't really grow. They don't study, God's war manual, the Bible.
Yeah.
And so I was a victim to that. So in my heart, I knew Jesus was King and He was Lord and Savior, and I was definitely a part of His army. The reality is that I was a private first class, and that's where I remained.
Sure.
Right. So I never grew, in the art of warfare, spiritual warfare. Right. And so I ended up flailing, getting my butt kicked a lot. And so, when people were asking me how was my faith walk at the time, I'm going to be honest with you. I think all the way up to 2010, what I was praying to God was for war. Because I think that a lot of us, we struggle with our identity. Yeah. And when we struggle with our identity, it's like, who are we? What are we supposed to be? Well, for me, I wanted you to read my story in a history book. I wanted people to go, man, Foxtrot November, that's my operating initials. I want to be just like that guy. I wanted to have all the awards and the accolades. I wanted to walk on in with a Mexican, general like salad, you know what I'm saying? Right. I want everyone to be like, dude, that guy rocks, man. Who is this guy?
Right.
And And so I was wrapping my identity around, with the things of the world. And so I was praying for war. I was like, I just wanted that, the mission of a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so my faith walk really wasn't there. And so, and I'll tell everybody who's out there, who's listening, you better watch out what you ask for, because you just may get it. And God gave me exactly what I wanted. I wanted the mission of a lifetime. And I'll tell you what, I almost got my butt handed to me.
Yeah.
And it was a 7-day firefight, particularly 3 days where I was fighting for my life. And God intervened. And that it was there that God met me once again, but it was different for me. This time I was like, enemies everywhere.
Yeah.
And I reached out to God and I asked him for, to protect me and the men. And the only way was through his divine power. And that's what happened. And we ended up getting extracted out.
Yeah.
All of our men came home to their wives and to their families. And I made a commitment to him that if he was to save me and all of our men, that I would worship him the rest of my days. So when I came home in 2010, it was there that God started really sifting through and fleshing out, man. It was just like, and it was like the Matrix. I took the red pill and then all of a sudden, like I see the world as it is and I see how filthy I am and how much I stink. You know what I mean? And God started just addressing a few things at a time. And that's when I really made a commitment to God. And it was there that I started growing in him. So it was pretty awesome.
So two things. One, you talk about being, prior to that in the darkest moment of your life, and you describe that. I think one of the things that many people outside of the military have a hard time getting a hold of is why. Why is it that people who are dealing with combat trauma and, a life of military service, and now, and you're exactly right on the TBI thing, I think for so long we've been misdiagnosing, what is an organic physical problem. We've been misdiagnosing that as post-traumatic stress and trying to treat it that way. But you have these issues, and then it brings you to the point where you say, I'm in that dark moment of life. I want my life to end. We know more than 20 service members a day, veterans and active duty service members a day take their lives. But around all of those statistics, I think there's the question for most people of why. What is it that brings someone who has served and is serving to that point? And I know you can't give, an entire answer on that. Every person is different. But for you, what was the thing that brought you to that? You serve honorably, you do what you do, you go through the process of, the ups and downs, and now you're hopeless. What took your hope away at that time?
I think that hopelessness is found when you try to solve the solution with self. Because we all get to the end of ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. So we're always, we hear you leaning on your own strength and your own understanding, and you're only limited with the strength that you have.
Yeah.
And I think that we come to a point where we just feel like we can't do anything more. And for me, when I was dealing with my pain, back pain, I'm throwing up from my headaches. Feeling dizzy, not sleeping at all, feeling a little crazy. You come to a point where I don't really understand why this is all happening, but I just don't want to live anymore like this.
Right.
That was kind of my thing. It was more of the pain, and also the pain from my past. I'll be the first person to tell you that my biological father is pretty much, he said, you'll never amount to anything without your father. And that always, even when I say it right now, it bothers me. It really does.
Right.
But the reality is that it's probably the only thing that my biological father ever said that was true, because I would never amount to anything but my Father in heaven.
Right.
So that's why it really resonates with me, And so I think for me, I just didn't want to deal with the pain anymore. I didn't understand why I was suffering, and other people that I love, like my wife, was also suffering. I had 2 children, and they're suffering. And sometimes I just thought, hey man, I got a huge life insurance policy.
Right.
I could just, check out, and they got the cash, and then they don't have to deal with my trap. They don't have to deal with me anymore.
Yeah.
And the God of the universe says, again, hearing the same words that I heard, the night that I'm sitting there and I'm looking at my Glock 19, and I'm just thinking, It's in my hand, and I'm thinking I could just pull this trigger and I could just be done with it. Same night, I hear, I made you for a purpose. I have a plan for you.
Yeah.
It's the same night that I heard that voice. I wasn't like engineering it. I wasn't even calling out. I just sat down. I'm like, I just don't want to live like this anymore.
Yeah.
And I heard that voice. And so I went from hopeless to full of hope. It says, I have plans. Those Jeremiah 29:11. It's real. But he says, but if you will call out to me, if you pray to me, if you seek me, you will find me. Everybody wants Jeremiah 29:11, but nobody
Right.
wants Jeremiah 29:12, 13, and 14. And that's where I really embraced my walk. And I reached out to him. I sought him. I prayed to him, and I said, God, only you can heal me. And the reality is that, I still struggle with a few things, but I think like Paul, it's a driving force. It reminds me of how fragile I am, and that I am human and I am finite, and that I need God. And it is through his might and his power that we're able to overcome and persevere. So, and that's where God and I don't want to say wrestled, but I was wrestling with my own infirmities, my own issues. And I asked all the whys. And sometimes you're not going to get your answer. When people get frustrated, it's like God's God.
Yep.
And he answers in his own timing.
Sure.
All I need to know is that he has paved the way, that he's gone before me, that if I follow him and I'm committed to him, he will bring me through.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the birth of SOF Missions. So that when I came back, I got holistic care. I received counseling. I received, TBI treatment. I received regenerative medicine. I received physical therapy, physical rehab. I received, different recreational therapies, and along throughout the years, I ended up getting a lot of that. And I became passionate about, God kept me alive, and he still keeps me alive today, but there's still trauma on the psychological and physiological dimension, not just the spiritual. So God takes care of the spiritual piece. So there's other aspects, and that's why SOF Missions exists, which is a holistic, care plan for our warriors, specifically for each individual.
So someone that's listening, someone that's watching, and they can identify with the darkness and the overwhelming hopelessness. They hear what you're saying, they like it, they believe it. What are the next first steps they need to take to begin moving forward in that relationship with God? That is healing, that is restoring.
Yeah, the reality is that it's coming to a point where you understand that out of 7.6 billion people in the whole world, 7.6 billion people in the whole world, that God knows you by name.
Yeah.
And that no matter how bad or where you're at or how dark it is, he will meet you. He will. He makes that commitment. And, and I'll tell you that probably the people that respond the most are the people that feel like they've lost everything.
Yep.
And there's nothing left. But I'm here to tell you, whoever you are out there listening to this, amazing podcast, that God does have a plan for you. And all you have to do is take first steps. I always tell people, you know what? Come to sofmissions.org. Come to us and allow somebody to help you. And you know what? If you tried everything, great. That means that you won't balk back at anything that we're going to give to you. And for us, we just want to put you on a path, on a journey to wellness. And that is psychological, it's physical, it's social, and it's spiritual. And we have a phenomenal committee, a healthcare committee of psychologists and physical medicine and rehabilitation and recreational therapists and life coaches and physical therapists. We have a phenomenal team, and we'll be able to bring that kind of help for you. And then through the process, have that conversation, because our mission statement is to empower our warriors to find purpose and to be resilient. Like, if you don't understand that you have a purpose, it's going to be hard to live, especially through the darkest of times. When you know you have a purpose, like I know that I have, and just like you, Jeremy, just like Chad does, we know that we have a purpose out there to bring the message of hope to a lost and broken world. And in this process, we become resilient through programs like Mighty Oaks, like SOF Missions, like the Warrior's Journey, like Reboot, and all these other amazing organizations in the Faith-Based Veteran Service Alliance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And connecting your purpose to then your daily actions is so important. And, as I read your book, Igniting Movements, it starts with chapter 1, finding your purpose, because that's where it has to begin. Can you take us through this idea of a movement versus an organization, why a movement's important, how it's exponential, and why normal people who aren't starting nonprofits should care? Because again, I think it's easy to go, well, that's for those guys over there who are trying to start a business. I'm not trying to start a business. Why should I care about movements, and what does it have to do with me?
So you asked like a lot of really amazing questions.
I'm pretty good at
So
asking amazing questions. I really
like
am.
4 targets. So I'm gonna hit 2, and then when I don't answer the third or the fourth, we'll go back to that. The first one is finding your purpose, right? So when I first started this, I was at Fuller Theological Seminary in their doctorate program, and I came in and I was doing humanitarian mission work through our nonprofit organization called SOF Missions. We're deploying, doing disaster relief, work, and I remember walking in, and the first day of school, my professor says, "I want you to look at your focus paper. Look at it," right? And the focus paper, besides all the the application process, which was a 40-page 4-book thing I had to do, I wrote a 1-page focus paper. And I remember what that was, but I remember my professor looked at each and every one of us as, is this what's going to keep you up at night? If this focus paper is not your purpose, I want you to grab that piece of paper, crumple it up, and throw it away. We're all like looking at each other, and I'm looking to my left and right. Like, I just came up with a good focus paper so I could get into the doctorate program. I'm going to be honest with you. It's like embedded special forces and something with cultural something. I don't even recall. But I knew that night that was not what was going to keep me up at night. And I grabbed that piece of paper and I threw it away. And my professor the next day says, I want you in the next 10 minutes to write down what you are super passionate about. And I wrote my purpose down, and that was to ignite movements. Like, I felt like God put a fire in me. Yeah. And I wanted to be able to empower people to change the world for good. So that's what I did. And in my dissertation, I knew that I started studying historical movements. I had interviews with some of the leading executives of the most successful nonprofit leaders in America, and then gleaned from my 20 years of special operation, my humanitarian work. I started packaging all that right in this book, and I realized something, that in this, I became a movement theorist as an intercultural studies graduate, and I realized that there was a big reason why so many nonprofit, or what I like to say is organizations, fail. Because you don't always have to be a nonprofit, and there's a difference between being a 501c3 and a nonprofit. Sure. And that is that there's common critical factors that ignites a movement. And there's a really big difference. I love the way you said that, Jeremy. There's a big difference between the organization and the people. The people are the movement, not the organization. The organization is responsible for igniting this movement, and through these people group, they're the ones who explode, and that's where the movement happens. Yeah. And so that's why a lot of nonprofit leaders or organizational leaders that want to change the world for good during these uncertain times, you want to help your communities, you want to help people that are hurting, and you want to know how to do it or what you need, this is the book for you. And that's why, so this is really a lot of research. And it's not because Dr. Damon Friedman says it, it's because that's what the research reveals, that these are the things that you need to have. And there are 4 major pillars. And that is in leadership, ideology, organization, and strategy. One other last question, and that is this is very important. And that is you can have all the hope, all the drive, and all the faith, but if you don't have a plan, you're not going to be successful. And that piece is really important. So there you have it. Yeah,
it's awesome. If you study the book of Acts, for those that read the Bible, and come from a Christian background, you read the book of Acts, there's interesting phrases that are used throughout the first several chapters. Jesus has come, he's died on the cross, he rose again, he gave the Great Commission, he said, go out and evangelize the world, and then he left, right? So that's what he did. Here's your mission, I'm out. And then the disciples started preaching and teaching, and the Bible says, on this moment, this event, so many, and it gives a number, were added. 3,000 were added, 4,000 were added, 5,000 were added. A shift takes place in the thinking of the disciples, and you see this happen throughout the book of Acts. And the shift is they go from, going up to a person saying, you need Jesus, to teaching a group of Jesus followers to go out and tell other people about Jesus. And the phrase changes from there were added to they multiplied. They multiplied. They multiplied. And the exponential factor there of teaching other people to do the work that you're passionate about because they're also passionate about it, it goes from being a local, New Testament Jerusalem movement to being a global movement that generations, 2,000 years later, impacts us. And I think if we don't understand the difference and why we should all be concerned about movements, then we're really limiting our own influence in the world.
I totally agree with you, brother. That's spot on. That's a very good exegesis on what's happening, and what happened with the New Testament explosion, with the people movement within the New Testament pattern.
How did you come to that, though, when you looked at your own organization? Because again, there's, particularly for organizational leaders, and I know a lot of them, our natural response to growth is to protect what we have and to be concerned more about a movement, because really it requires the release of control. It requires then that we also take a bigger look. In your own experience, running a nonprofit, meeting the needs of people, primarily in America and in South America, really around the world, right? How did you go from that to going, I need to do more, and this is what it looks like?
So I love that question, Jeremy. Thank you for asking that. At the very end of my last statement, I said you could have a lot of faith, hope, and drive. So at the time, I was doing a lot of humanitarian work, and I did that as a SOF operator. And so I understood what it looked like to do, med caps and stuff, providing medical clinics and food distributions, and even doing building projects. So that wasn't natural for me. And where I felt like God called me to start really transitioning to focusing on really the resiliency of veterans back in America, I didn't know how to do it. I gleaned from my own journey to get well, but I also didn't really know how to do it as an organization. And this is where, you have a lot of faith, you have a lot of hope, you have a lot of drive, and all those things are awesome. But the reality is unless you really understand the business and you actually have a plan, you're setting yourself up for failure. So pragmatism is very important. So for me, as I was learning more about what these nonprofits or these organizational leaders were doing throughout the world, and I was learning more and more about these 4 major pillars, I started applying them to my own organization. SOF Missions is super successful. We just talking about the numbers, we with this holistic care, it's very expensive. It's about $15,000 per warrior through the Resiliency Project, and we provided it for a whole year, and it's a gamut of resources. And Mighty Oaks is one of the phases where they go. It's kind of the reset button and the reignition, right? Sure. To fight for faith, fight for family, fight for friends. That's what I love about Mighty Oaks. I mean, they come back and they're like swinging. They got their Spartan sword. They're ready to go to war, man. Anything in their way, they're about to like straight up stab and chop and thrust with the shield. But the deal is that for us, we realized that understanding the intricate components of it was really important. And so I was learning more and more about what these organizations were doing. Through the Resiliency Project, we had 72 warriors. That's a whole care, all the care in the world for a whole year. And we provided 3,100 warriors with Connect Care. Wow. That means that they came to us. They don't need the entire year's worth of care. Yep. And so now we're just, bridging that gap, whatever resource or service that they need. And that's what we've been doing. How do you do that? And then, and be able to serve all those people? Well, I learned from other experts. And so I learned from them and I started applying them. So SOF Missions is a direct reflection of the research. So that's what I did. I learned from the best. I packaged it all into a book. 4 major pillars. And then I applied them to my own nonprofit. Now I'll tell you, based off of the size of your organization, you'll find these common critical variables. Some of the factors are not applicable based off of the size. But that's okay. So as you grow, you'll be able to multiply and use those. But if you're at a certain size, and most nonprofits, it's just husband and wife or sometimes individuals or, 2 people, and they're trying to change the world for good and they just don't know what to do. This is what you need to have as far as the ingredients, the blueprint in order to really be more effective. And I'm not saying they're saying it and I'm packaging it.
I'd like to get to contextualizing the message, your 4th pillar, in a minute. But for someone who is an individual, they're going to a church, they really care, they volunteer for everything they can volunteer for, they love missions trips, whatever. their heart is to serve people, but they hear what you're talking about and it's overwhelming to them, that's for someone else. What would your suggestion be to that person to find their place in a movement that's taking place? Where do they start? Where do they jump in?
Yeah, so I always tell people, do you really have to start your own nonprofit organization? Is there another organization out there that's really moving and shaking?
Yeah.
Can you not just join theirs and then just grow and learn? Because that's what I recommend to everybody else. When I first started, I just joined other people's movements and I learned from their victories and their failures. And ultimately, when I felt called to actually stand up my own nonprofit, we were pretty successful, but it was a crawl, walk, run. And so, but I also kind of want to go back into what you just asked, is self-reflection. If you're going to be a leader, particularly for a movement, a really important, in the pillar of leadership, it's very important that you understand what it means to inspire followers. And you really have to understand that there's a lot of different factors or a lot of characteristics that a leader should have. It's very important that we exude it is the most important one, and that's humility. And when you are humble, you'll be able to understand more of who you are and your ultimate purpose and where God is driving you.
Yeah.
And so not just the humility part of leadership, but you also understand in order to ignite a movement and inspire followers to follow you, you have to have a driven ideology. That means that in this book, I talk about a guidebook. And so this book is good for the secular audience, but I use my faith, my experience through Christendom as examples. But you also have to have a guidebook. Mine is the Bible, right? That's my moral compass. Yeah. And understanding what it means to have esprit de corps within your own community. Because and I'm going to tell you right now, if you're out there and you're running a nonprofit, it is hard, man. It is hard. It's like, how do I get the money to do this service? There's all these people that need help, but I don't know how to get these funds to help my friends. Well, the reality is that you have to, and then when you have people that are following you, you need to make sure that you inspire them. And for me, the cause is beyond yourself. So as a leader, understanding that humility is the number one characteristic, you have to humble yourself to the higher power. This is for me, right? Yeah. And my driven ideology is that other people will understand that we're in this cause that's far greater. For example, ours, you and I, your Mighty Oaks and SOF Missions, we're here to put a dent in the 22. And we believe that we're freedom fighters. Our higher calling is to be freedom fighters, to help people fight and to be free from oppression, from the enemy, to say that your life is meaningless, that you're better off dead. That's a lie. And so we're fighting for that. And so when we have people in this whole process, the drive is beyond ourselves. It is a cause beyond us. It is a cause not just worth living for. It's not just a cause worth fighting for. This is a cause worth dying for. So when things get hard and you have your brothers to the left and your right and everybody's down, like, remember why we're doing this. It's not about money, right? It's not about fame. It's not about any of those, things out in the world. It's about because God has called us to do this and to save a lost and broken world. When you have a driving ideology like that, there's nothing you cannot get through. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's great. The humility piece of that, I mean, so much of what you just said, I get asked often, and I'm sure you do too, by individuals who are either starting a nonprofit or they're interested in starting a nonprofit. Where do I start? What do I do? And I always say the same thing that you just said. Find someone who's doing what you want to do and partner with them and see where that goes. What I found is that most of the time people are less interested in meeting a need than they are in starting an organization. And so really for most people what it comes down to is, no, I want to run that. I want to start that. I want to do that. And with 44,000 something veterans nonprofits in the United States, I think the question really needs to be asked is, upon your own reflection and honest evaluation, are you equipped to do that? And do we need another one of those? Or is there a movement that's taking place, something that you can get in on and leverage what you have? But without the passion you just talked about, it really becomes about me doing what I want to do instead of me leveraging what I have to meet a very real need. And I think that's the difference.
Jeremy, that's Shaq on target. And that's the reason why most nonprofits fail. Right. Because it's about self. Right? Like we act like Well, you and I both have known these people. They act like they're trying to be altruistic, but really it's about self.
Sure.
And when it's about self, you're going to be blind. That's why when I started in the nonprofit world, I just served, I volunteered. I just wanted to be part of the team and I wanted to learn. And when I found that there was a need in a place and there was a project, and they needed a project and it was a particular people group and that wasn't being served, I prayed about it. And I not only prayed about it, I asked my friends and leaders to help me. Is this really something I should do? And I'm telling you right now, it's amazing that when you really are locking arms with men and women of faith that are genuinely interested in your spiritual growth as a leader, they're going to tell you the truth. Now, I'll tell you, Jeremy, leadership comes in all different ways and facets. You don't have to be the CEO to be a leader.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the biggest challenge that a lot of these people have. You could be a team leader. And the way that you could be a great team leader is start with just being part of the team.
Yeah.
Right? We all start off, like you're in the Marine Corps. When you first started, you had to earn your Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. Right. You didn't become an officer. You had to go to boot camp and you got your soul crushed. And before you got your butter bar, you earned your Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. And that was saying, I have earned to be a part of the team. Everybody wants to get their commission right off the bat. Nobody wants to go through boot camp.
Yeah.
That's really the important. Are you ready to go to boot camp?
Yeah.
If you really, really want to lead, then you got to go through boot camp first. If you want to skip boot camp, then you need to check your heart.
Yeah, it's crazy. A long time ago, I was told by someone that God can't move a ship in the harbor, that God can move and God can steer a moving ship. I probably just got that wrong, but you get the analogy. If it's moving, God can steer it. If it's not, it's crazy. You know, I've been in pastoral ministry and in church ministry, and you have individuals who are like, I've got to have a meeting with you. I need some counsel. I really believe God wants me to be a pastor. And you look at these people across the desk and you know they won't volunteer for anything. They won't do anything, but they believe God is calling them to pastor. And you know, I'm not as bold as I once was. As I get older, I try to get kinder. But you look at these folks and say, God's not calling you to pastoral ministry because you haven't even started with the basic stuff. You don't care enough about people to be involved in that level of leadership and ministry. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about. The people God uses are the people who are just saying, where's the broom? What needs to be done? Where do I start? And it's amazing how God really, uses those people in such a tremendous way. Passion, man.
Jeremy, you're on point with that. What you just said really resonates because at the end of the day, there's a really good book called Servant Leadership. Yeah. I can't remember off the top of my head the author, but I always recommend people, if you really want to be a leader, you must first be a servant. And I'll tell you, the ultimate servant, the most incredible leader ever was Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's right.
When it came down to it, he got on his hands and his knees and he washed his disciples' feet. I always ask those individuals that want to spearhead a movement and be the president of a nonprofit, have you washed your people's feet? Because if you haven't, that's probably where you need to start. And if your ego is too big, then you need to reevaluate, because I'm going to tell you, right, faith, hope, and drive, it's not enough, man. So you got to have a plan.
That's good. We've only got a couple minutes. I wanted to get to this part of, what you define as the fourth pillar, it's strategy, but contextualizing messaging, outreach, and partnerships. If we had time, we could talk about all of those things. I'd like for you to address, if you wouldn't mind, contextualizing messaging. For this reason, I get a lot of pushback on this, and it's less all of the time, but certainly in the beginning, we got a lot of pushback on the idea that veterans should speak to veterans, that combat veterans should work with combat veterans. And the idea, particularly coming from a church background, is that the Bible is true whether you've been a veteran or not. The principles of Scripture are powerful whether you've lived that experience or not. And I certainly believe that you don't have to have cancer as a doctor to know how to address someone with cancer. But I also understand that if we're not willing to contextualize our message, to put it into language that people understand, then we'll never be effective. And my opinion is that often the reason we won't is because we're either too proud or too lazy to do the hard work of understanding what the people we're speaking to need to understand. And you did a great job. Chapter 6 was helpful to me. Can you talk about that for a second? Contextualizing why it's important, what it means, and what it doesn't mean. We're not saying that, there's a clique and it's this small and you have to be a part of it. Talk about that for a second, if you wouldn't mind.
So I'd like to use the analogy of our professional speaking. So I have a testimony, I have a story, and I shared it in the first quarter of this podcast. When I go and I speak to a church, the way that I contextualize the message, the words that I use, the examples that I use are very specific to a faith-based audience. And some of the audience is a little, could be older, and the audience could be a little younger. I'll use different examples to really connect with them. If I go to a more of a commercial or a school, now I have high schoolers or middle schoolers. I change the way that I shape the message, same testimony, right? But I'll highlight the things that will really connect with those individuals as high schoolers and middle schoolers or whatever it may be. If I go to a corporate America, same testimony, I'm going to use different examples. I'm going to highlight different things. Why? Because if you don't contextualize the message, you're going to lose your audience, okay? And so when you take a step back, you said it right. People are lazy. I would almost say that sometimes they're just ignorant. They're like, well, here's the deal. When you look at Paul, when he connected with the Hebrews, he started with the lineage of Abraham because that was a great starting point. You could go to any Hebrew, Pharisee, you know, and you could sit down and you go, hey, we're going to start from Abraham or the people. They knew who they were, who he was. He was the father of the faith. Right. But distinctly different when he went to the Greeks, totally different culture to the Epicureans and the Stoics. He didn't start off with Abraham. They would think that he was ludicrous, that he was, you know, senile. Instead, he looked over and he was very familiar with the culture. And that's a part of it. Do you even know the culture of the people that you're trying to connect with? Because if you don't, you've either been lazy or you're ignorant. Because the reality is that God loves culture, and he also loves it when we study the culture that we're trying to connect with. He goes, there's this tomb to the unknown God, and that's where he started. He understood that the Greeks loved the constellations and all of their stories. And so he started off with the unknown God. He's talking about the creation of the world, really resonating with him, and then ultimately leading from the creator to Jesus Christ as Lord. Now, I'll tell you what, he was just literally connecting the dots. And so I tell people when they're out there, are you doing it? Now, the reality is peer-based programs are so successful because the warrior understands the language and understands the culture. Right. And the physicians who have been embedded, not the physicians who've stayed in the hospital, the physicians and the medical providers that have been embedded with the military, they've been embedded with our operators, they're embedded with the Marine Corps. They understand the culture and they realize they can't just come out with, you know, their, you know, the legacy thinking and whatever it was. They got to be able to look at that warrior in the face and be able to use the words and the language that they understand. There's a certain behavior that you have to understand and appreciate if you want to connect. So when you contextualize that message, you're literally starting where your audience needs to begin, not where you need to begin. Right. You don't start where you need to begin. You start where they need to begin. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, fantastic. Man, that's what really I think puts a lot of power on your passion is because you're willing to say they need help. This is the kind of help they need. I'm going to figure out how to communicate this to them. I think we lack so much power as believers often because we hold the greatest message ever delivered to mankind in our hands. And yet we have not figured out how to communicate that message to the people that need it most.
Right.
And I think that's what, when you talk about peer programs and the types of programs that we're involved in, really, we're all broken, we're all a mess. We're a few steps ahead maybe of the guy that's sitting on the couch, but we're just trying to help them get there. And man, so important. Thanks for the conversation. Where can people learn more about SOF Mission first? And then learn about the book, get the book, and connect with you.
Yeah, so if you're a warrior out there or spouse or family member and a warrior needs help, go to sofmissions.org. We want to help you. We love you. There is hope. And no matter how dark it is, trust me, there is hope. And just come to sofmissions.org. If you want to learn more about my book, super excited. We ended up becoming we hit the bestseller list, actually number 5. And I can't believe that, especially me being a no-name person, just writing a book filled with passion.
Yeah, it's awesome.
You could just go to my website, damonfriedman.com or ignitingmovements.com. Yeah. And you can learn more about this book. It's also on Amazon. You just find Igniting Movements, buy yourself a copy, and let me know how I can help you out. So DamonFriedman.com or Amazon.
Beautiful, man. Thank you. Really appreciate you guys and all that you're doing. And we'll be working together, of course, going into the future, but we'll get on the show again and do some more stuff. Who knows? The world is constantly changing. We're always figuring it out. But
hey, Jeremy, listen, I thank you so much. And I want you to know, anytime you want me to come on the show, talk about anything, I'm here. I'll be your battle buddy.
Awesome.
Chad travels a lot. You know what talking machine guns look like. I'll be your machine gun, and I'll talk with you. So when you're done rattling it out, you'll let your barrel cool down, and I'll get after it. Okay.
Awesome.
So
man.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for bringing me on. You guys are doing amazing work, and it's my honor to be on the show.
For sure, man. Thank you. Really appreciate it. We'll talk again. For those of you that are watching, thanks for watching. Again, subscribe, hit the notification bell. For those of you that are listening, take some time to go over to YouTube. You can find us, Mighty Oaks Programs, and that'll bring up our page. Go ahead and subscribe to the page, hit the notification bell, and we'd love to continue to share this content with you. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.